Good morning, friends. This is Jeffrey Phillips, Associate Pastor of Winnetka Congregational Church. Welcome to Spiritual Enrichment for the week of April 26th. Today we continue a four-part series on how to deal with people who have different views, especially those who have different views than ours about the important issue of climate change. I'm recording this interview with Reverend Catherine Watkins on Tuesday, April 21st, which makes tomorrow, the 22nd on Wednesday, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And it's our custom at Winnetka Congregational Church and our adult spiritual formation ministry to have some environmental programs focused on the environment and spirituality the last half of April and into May. And this year, that's what our topic is. Last week, local psychotherapist Michael Montgomery presented. Today, it's Catherine. And Catherine is an ordained minister with the United Church of Christ, a colleague, friend of mine, and also a staff member at Samaricare, based in Winnetka. And next week, we're going to have a very relevant TED Talk by climatologist and Christian Catherine Hayhoe. And she makes a life as a climatologist and as a Christian going around talking to people about climate change in a way that will open up the conversation rather than shut it down, which is exactly what we're going for in these 4 weeks. The week after that, we have another TED Talk that's relevant to this topic. It's by a meteorologist who also has a passion for talking constructively with folks on this important topic. So before I get back to Catherine and let her introduce herself, let's begin with some breathing, some awareness of the Spirit's presence among us, within us. Wherever you are seated today, whatever your frame of mind is today, know that the Spirit is with us, that we are not alone, that we have one another, that we have a divine and eternal presence that joins us. Breathe deeply in the reality of that essence. Breathing out the presence of the divine. Breathing in deeply the Spirit of Christ, resurrected, alive forevermore. Breathing out all anxiety and distractions and disturbances of spirit and body. So again, we welcome our guest today, Reverend Catherine Watkins, ordained not very long ago.
Almost a year now.
How long?
Almost a year now.
Almost a year.
Oh, like a real veteran.
Hooray. That's awesome. And Catherine, I just want to say personally that every time I see you at a function, I'm just happy to see you.
Well, thank you.
True with everybody. You have a wonderful presence.
Well, thank you. And I hope that I'm able to share some of that today.
Good. So over to you. Tell us more about yourself and then go right into your presentation.
All right. As Jeffrey mentioned, I am ordained in the United Church of Christ in the same cluster, actually, as Winnetka Congregational. So I get to see some of your lovely pastor peeps at occasional clergy cluster meetings. I am kind of the accidental therapist. I never intended to, and I never intended to do that reverend thing either. So where I find myself today is funny, and it can actually be a fairly long story, but I'll keep it short. Out of undergrad, I wanted to go into academia, and I went to, I got a master's at Emory with intention of going on to a PhD. And that was about a semester in, I was like, I do not want a PhD. And sort of accidentally ended up in the chaplaincy field and was doing chaplaincy for a while, predominantly pediatric. And, you know, over a period of time, I started taking some classes to help with my, I thought I needed some more assessment tools and work, and kind of accidentally I got a master's in counseling. And so there, and I've always, for a very long time, worn both hats. Worked part-time in chaplaincy and part-time in counseling. And with the way our wonderful healthcare system worked, at some point I had to pick one to be full-time. I needed the benefits. And until about a year and a half ago, I still wore the chaplaincy hat. And so that is just some of the context that I want to come to you from and within is not just having the faith and theological side in practice or in principle or in theory or in title, but that's actually how I started all of this craziness that is interpersonal help. I also kind of want to mention that my area of expertise, my specialty within counseling is in trauma. Particularly like the unwitnessed, unseen trauma, a lot of abuse history, particularly that which comes along with gaslighting and manipulation. So that's a lot of the context where I come to you from, particularly with this trying to engage in dialogue with others. Originally, the very first version of this presentation that I wrote however many years ago was born about from this context, and it was really came out of trying to help clients set boundaries with very unreasonable people who were pros at manipulation, some of whom had actually been very harmful to the clients themselves. So we'll talk about boundary setting. We will talk a lot about what goes on behind the defensiveness. This program's had a lot of different titles: constructive conversation, problem-solving communication, dealing with unreasonable people, breaking through anger, defensiveness. So all that kind of, all of that really speaks to some of the same thing. And my hope is that it will translate to helping you guys understand more about engaging people in conversation with whom you find it very difficult. I also, at my last job, for a while, I taught an anger management course. It was like a 12-week class. It was pretty basic, but I also took a lot of the tools from that in terms of trying to get at what's behind the anger. So sometimes I'll talk about anger, sometimes it'll be defensiveness. It's really just any block that there is in terms of trying to engage someone in conversation. So Jeffrey, please interrupt me at any point if I'm not clear on vocabulary or where I am. I'm very used to, and to all the people out there, I'm used to doing this as more of a dialogue and feeding off of to whoever I'm working. So I will be relying on Jeffrey. And
I should mention that we will have time with Catherine on Sunday morning, April 26th, 8:45 to 9:30 for a live conversation. And that's been what we've been doing since our quarantine time began, but just wanted to make sure that folks know that you'll have a chance to have direct conversation with Catherine on this Sunday, the 26th, 8:30.
8:30 in the morning.
a.m. Chicago time.
That's good. Which is great because I do have a lot of examples. Michael talked a little bit last week about the translation, saying something, it kind of going through his head and spitting out a more nonviolent communication method. And that is something I enjoy doing, is that translation of, so what I hear you saying is, and we'll have a chance to do that a little bit more on Sunday. Anyway, okay. So normally, I save that. Not going to do a whole lot of slides. I have a couple from a previous thing that I just think are important for you guys to see. And this is one I usually save for much later on, but you guys are lucky enough that you get to see it first. I am going to try share screen. Oh, I might not be doing this. So usually I mention this a little bit later on, but you guys get to hear it first. This is an important sentence, and I'm going to say it a few times. In order to effectively break through anger, defensiveness, and resistance, we must understand it as an attempt to protect the self from perceived threats. Protecting yourself from perceived threats. The three important pieces there are protect, perceived, and threats. Okay. Most anger, all behaviors are stem from a need. Everything we do is need-based. Take a sip of water because you're thirsty. You stand up and go over there because you want some chips. I mean, everything we do has a need behind it, even if the need is just laying on the couch or relaxing. Anger, defensiveness, those are protective actions. Anything that's based in anger is protective. Therefore, there must be a threat. Even if we don't think there's a threat, anger and defensiveness is an attempt to protect someone emotionally, physically, whatever it is, from a perceived threat. Sometimes it's obvious. If someone throws a ball at my head, I'm like, hey, that is not perceived. It is real. Well, it is perceived, but it is real. Michael talked last week about speaking with people who are fearful. And I love that. That's the exact same thing that I'm talking about right now, is that fear is an attempt to protect yourself. Say if you insult someone or someone insults you and says, hey, you're ugly. It's like, that it's a pretty obvious defense of wanting to protect your, whatever it is, dignity, self-confidence, reputation. It's really straightforward. It's protective, yelling back, trying to look bigger, better, stronger than the other, or dispute the situation. It actually goes deeper than that. It's not just, hey, I'm not ugly. It's physiological. There is something within our system called the autonomic nervous system. It's nervous. But autonomic means it happens without really our consent. There is a part in the middle of the brain. If this is your brain, this is the part down in the middle, lizard brain, that when triggered goes into fight or flight mode. Fight, flight, freeze, play dead is something that still happens, and it happens even with emotional triggers. We go into defensive mode. We are hardwired to do this because evolutionarily, it is what has kept us alive. So this isn't something we get to just turn off. Whether we're being charged by a grizzly bear or someone is insulting us, our brain goes into let's protect. And that's something that we can override, but we cannot get rid of it. And I say this because you have to know that before going into a conversation with someone. You have to know that you have to do double, triple, quadruple the effort to create a safe space because we are so predisposed to protecting ourselves. It's as simple as that. And this goes emotionally, applies emotionally as well. I could go on about this for a while. I've done whole presentations just about the brain reactions. So if you want to know more, ask me on Sunday. I'm going to spare you right now. The other part to be aware of is that the threat center of the brain, if this is your brain and it's in there, it's nowhere near the logic center. It's actually up here. And so you can't, if someone's threatened, you can't actually have a logic-based conversation until the safety part has been diffused, which is part of the reason why you can't reason with a toddler who's having a tantrum. The toddler part is part of it, but anyone who's having a tantrum, it's like, well, let's think of this logically. No! You're in protective mode. So yes, be mindful that sometimes the threat is very much perceived. It doesn't have to be real, as in like standing right here. It can be perceived. Jeffrey, I sent you an attachment. I'd love for you to show it right now.
Right.
It's called the anger iceberg, and you can Google anger iceberg, click on images, and a whole bunch of them will pop up. This is one that I like to use. If you can scroll down a little bit, just so we can see the top and the bottom of the iceberg here.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, that's enough.
The top, there's the bottom.
Yeah. So if you just go up into the, yeah, that works.
Okay.
Actually, if you can click that part in there on the top row that says fit to page.
Oh, look at that. Look at that.
Look at that. You don't need to read all the small bits. You can if you want. But what I want to show you, what I love about this diagram is that anger is just the little piece that you see. The point is all of this other stuff is going on beneath the surface. I like to think of it more as like the defensiveness iceberg. And what I used to do, I actually do this with clients still, but what I used to do in my group is I would hand out a printout of this to all the clients at the beginning of the class, the 12-week period. And as it went on, if they thought of other things for them that are triggers that they cover up with anger or defensiveness, they would write them in. And, you know, anger and defensiveness are socially acceptable. Things like hurt, embarrassed, disappointed, helpless are things that we don't, especially as Americans, are not taught to share or show. So it's much easier, first of all, physiologically, but also socially for, you know, how are you doing? I'm pissed off, as opposed to, you know, I'm feeling really scared today. That's just not how we are taught to talk. So this has a lot to do with why we have to sort of deconstruct the defensiveness before you can go into conversation. I will mention, notice at the bottom there is shame. We're going to come back to that a bunch. That is one of the most dangerous emotions out there because it is one of the ones that we protect the most, and it is incredibly threatening to get anywhere near it for a lot of people. So that can be a dangerous area. We can send this out with the recording if you want. I have other copies or versions of it that I like, but also you guys can search for it yourself. So keep that in mind as we move forward.
So Catherine, I will send this out.
Okay.
Since I have it now, I'll send it out with everything this week.
Okay. So now I want to go into a little bit of some of the things that we might say to other people. Some of the conversation bits. I wrote, let's talk about, well, talking. That works. So the way that we have to do this is the most non-threatening ways possible. And this is a bit like learning a new skill. You know, when you learn a new basketball shot or something, you have to kind of over-exaggerate it. Some of what I talk about here might sound really clunky and not the way you would normally talk to people. That's okay. Tripping over your words and saying, hold on, I'm trying to find the right ones, indicates to someone that you're really making an effort. And as you practice this more and more, they may become more habitual, which is nice. The first thing that I want to mention about non-confrontation and non-threatening conversation is stick to facts. Separating facts from assumptions, opinions, judgments is really hard. You are an idiot is not a fact. Jeffrey, I see that I noticed this is the third time we've talked this week, and we really haven't gotten to talk about blah, 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 blah. That may be factual, right? But you are hiding things from me. That's opinion, okay? This is where I really like to give examples and point to people and think of things. And this is where I'm struggling with my Post-it note that says, look here. But sticking to facts and assumptions, judgments. Judgment is a very judgy word, but a judgment is when you are holding someone else to your expectation. So you're not doing that right. Right would be my expectation. What you are doing is illegal, maybe factual. I don't like what you're doing is opinion and assumption. Okay, so we can do a lot more work on this, but I actually usually spend an entire class period, group period in the anger class separating assumptions from judgments.
Since you like some interaction, let me give you some here. On the climate change issue, sometimes I've seen those discussions become arguments about the facts. Yeah. And which I think gets into that rational, like uh, argument that doesn't work when there's really a lot of emotions going on underneath the surface.
Yes.
So what do you do when someone wants to cite, my statistics are more accurate than your statistics?
I think this is where we get into issues of belief. Michael talked last week about not just the tribalism, but how much people, it's not just confirmation bias, but how much stock you really take in what your tribe believes and it being true, and how science is not always true. I would be interested in engaging then, why do you believe in these facts? Maybe not saying it that way. What is it about these statistics that captures your attention more than, say, these statistics? Maybe that has to do with the research behind it, which, you know, it's this accredited laboratory versus this person who finished 5th grade. You know, what is it that allows you, because we've heard about how science can be all over the place. We also know that, what was the example he used last week? You know, one day there's an article that comes out saying that coffee's great for you, and the next day says it's terrible for you. Why do we believe what we do? You know, what is it about this article or these statistics that capture your attention more than, say, my statistics? And sometimes it boils down to, well, those don't agree with what I believe in or what I need to be true. And then we come back to needs. Okay, if someone has a need, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out the 4th week of this series, the climatologist who teaches at a college level, he's not a meteorologist, rather. He's not a TV meteorologist. He's a professor of meteorology. He's talking about confirmation bias.
Perfect.
In that TED talk. So this all.
Yeah, so we can come back to this a little bit in examples. I just want to make sure that we don't run out of time for the more foundational parts. Facts, facts, facts. And when I say facts, I don't mean statistics show. I mean what has actually happened. One of the examples we used a lot in the anger group was someone picking you up or giving you a ride or to the group. And if they're late, and it's like, you're always late. Always is not true. This is the 3rd time this week you've been late in picking me up. Or we had agreed on 10 o'clock. It is 10:10. I'm frustrated with this. Okay. So facts, facts, facts. It's not necessarily statistics, but things that are real and undisputable for a couple reasons. One, because then you're not exaggerating, blowing things out of proportion. You always do this, or name calling, any of that. And second is it's I was going to say non-negotiable, but you can't argue with it. It's indisputable. You're always late. Well, I'm not always late. This is the 3rd time this week you've been late. That is correct. Like, no, it isn't. Well, here are the, you know, so it moves the conversation away from, I know you are, but what am I, to, you know, what you're talking about stays with what you're talking about. I statements. This is meant to be an I, not a one this time. I statements for several reasons. First of all, you're talking about what's true for you when it comes to feelings and emotions. Secondly, you is aggressive. Jeffrey, you are wearing a red shirt. I mean, it sounds aggressive even though it's completely factual, right? As opposed to, I noticed that you're wearing a red shirt. Sounds more like the beginning of a conversation as opposed to getting ready to, I don't know, get mad at him for wearing a red shirt. I statements are sometimes coupled with feelings, emotions, needs. This is the 3rd time this week you've been late, and I'm getting frustrated. It's not, I hate you. It's, I'm feeling, you know, I'm getting agitated because arriving on time is important to me. It's not because you're a terrible person. This is what it's doing to me. This is the why I'm coming to you. This is why this matters to me. You know, I noticed you're wearing a red shirt, and I'm getting kind of agitated because it's not yet Pentecost. And to me, it's important to blah, 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 blah. It explains the why. The why am I starting this conversation? Why does the red shirt matter? You know, I see you're wearing a red shirt. He's like, that's nice. Here, you know, this is the why. If there are requests, simple and very clear. Next time we talk, I would appreciate it if you wore a blue shirt. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying it would make a difference to me. And it's simple and clear. If I said I would appreciate you wearing a different shirt and he shows up in another red shirt and then I'm mad at him, well, I wasn't very clear. So when we talk about really basics of problem solving communication, it's based around facts, I statements. The feelings are things that are true for you. Sometimes need is in there. And they're phrased in the why for you, that this is important. Simple and clear requests. That last one may not be as much a part of it when you're launching into a larger conversation about, say, climate change, political differences, because you wouldn't open a conversation with, I noticed you voted for the other part, or you support a different party from me. That makes me angry. Change your vote. Like, that's not how that works. But this is how, when starting on a small scale, this is how we do small requests. We talk a lot about frustrating neighbors. I notice you're leaving food out for stray cats. I think that's wonderful. However, the cats are also eating my bird seed and blah, 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 blah. Can we discuss how you can still feed cats, but I won't lose my birds? So anyway, another thing I want to mention quickly when we are still at basics, there's a man named Dan Hughes who teaches out of Maine. He does some really amazing work that is tangential to this, but one of his communication method acronyms is called PACE, and I love it, and it is really, really great for trying to work with people who just don't want to. So PACE stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. I'm going to say it again. Playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. I don't know how to make any. He works mostly with kids, so the playfulness is a lot of that. I want to focus more on the ACE part of it, but know that playfulness is a really great way to engage people. When it's adults, you don't say, hey, dude, those are cool shoes, but you can still really get attention. I mean, it was a bit playful that I seemed to have an issue with Jeffrey's shirt. That's part of what kind of gets your attention and drives the point home. So acceptance, accepting that what someone has just said is true for them. Just accept it. Curiosity, tell me more. I wonder why that might be true. Is non-judging. It's asking for more information. It's the curiosity. And empathy. Oh, that must be tough. One example that I like to give for how PACE works is presenting it in opposition to platitudes. If someone's like, I'm having a rough day. Oh, it'll get better. That's completely denying whatever the person is feeling. And it's just, so if someone's like, everything just sucks right now. If we approach that with PACE, or at least ACE, it might look like acceptance. Wow, things sounds like things are really tough for you right now. Curiosity. I wonder why. Tell me more about that. What's so tough right now? And empathy. I'm sorry it's so hard. Maybe you don't see 3 different sentences, but if you think of PACE and non-judgmental ways of approaching, I find his PACE examples to be really helpful. It also is really amazing to hear him use it because he developed it and has been doing it for 20 years. But, short of going to Maine or watching a video, still stuck with me. Something I want to, I'm going to read off of a slide here. I want to talk a little bit about defensiveness and how to, some of the things, do's and don'ts for engaging. Always give options. Okay. I don't want to be here. Okay. You can leave, but then we won't have a conversation. I think of kids who are, just have had it. Okay, you can't throw pizza in a restaurant. So either we leave and you don't get pizza, or we get to stay, but you can't throw the pizza. Not that we're going to engage many people throwing pizza, but an example of not just saying, don't do that. It's like, well, you can do that, but then there are consequences. Giving options and showing them. Explaining your position or request. Jeffrey, this might sound weird, but the red shirt is actually really bothering me because In the church I was growing up in, we were actually not allowed to wear red prior to Pentecost or something. And this is completely made up. But by explaining it, he might not be like, okay, you're being silly. He might say, wow, like, I'm not going to change my shirt, but that makes more sense to me. Thank you for explaining. Some don'ts. Do not tell them to calm down. That goes with the platitudes. Do not use you statements. Don't demand or corner. Don't try to pry it out. I know you're holding something from me. Don't try to force anything. Do validate feelings. So if he, for Jeffrey might say, wow, I understand that this shirt is causing you a lot of distress. I'm sorry, we're in the middle of a video. I can't change it right now, but I'm sorry that this has become an issue. Valid. And it's like, thank you. Use I statements. I was bothered by the shirt. Give options, like we just said. Empathize. Use feeling words. Create safety. And I went away before the last one. Ask questions. He might have said, sorry this bothers you. What might it be about a red shirt? If I wasn't necessarily ready to volunteer that. Some other things to be aware of, and this is really important stuff when it comes to disarming the threat. Because in the middle of all of this, trying to talk with other people, we have to be aware of what might be threatening them, as well as what might be threatening us. Language and vocabulary. Michael talked a lot about, or talked a bit about not labeling the other. He even went through, changed on his slides, not even calling them climate change deniers, but actually making them human. And that's incredibly important. My mom is really, really good at picking just the right words to just get under my skin without actually saying anything critical. It feels critical. And so I know you all know people like that. Here's a kind of fun example. Many years ago, in seminary, I was on a panel of sort of something about, I don't even remember exactly, but it was something about LGBTQ in the church and something. And so we're at this table, and it was just for us, our little seminary group. So it wasn't huge, but we were getting introduced, and they said, on the far right, we have Catherine, blah, 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 blah. And I started to get and I realized that I had never before been introduced as being on the far right. So language matters. And I was ready to fight for my stance here because I wanted to prove I wasn't what, and so we ended up joking about it, but the words you use matter, very much matter. Any suggestions that you might make to the other should be made in the form of curiosity or wanting more information, as opposed to patronizing, well, how come you don't like mine? And saying, like we said earlier, what is it about those facts that gets your attention? I'm curious about your reaction to this. My dad had a really, really great one. Yes, this was a couple years ago, we were in some meeting. He and I went to the same university, so sometimes we end up in alumni meetings together. And I could tell he very much disagreed with what someone was saying about a strategic plan or something. And instead of saying, hey, I have an idea, why don't you like my idea? He said, I'm wondering if there's merit in trying blah, 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 blah. And I loved it. And I use it sometimes. And instead of saying, I'm not agreeing with you and I have a better idea, he asked, I wonder if there's merit in this. And the person proceeded to prove him wrong as to why there really wasn't. But that was his way of saying, I have an idea, but I also don't know, have you thought of this? Have you not? It was kind of neat. I'm aware of time. Know who is talking, okay? What do you represent to them? This skin color, gender, age. Some of it is obvious in terms of skin color, things like that. But some is less obvious if the other has a history of negative encounters with males, with white males. These kinds of things will matter. Do you represent the church? If you guys are going to engage in conversation, are you going on behalf of Winnetka Congregational? And does the other have a history of not being treated well by the church? These things matter. Power dynamics. In addition to knowing who you're talking to, are you on neutral ground? Is this something everyone has access to? There was a huge issue, well, among many who worked at, I used to work at Lurie Children's, which of course previously was Children's Memorial. When they moved down to Streeterville, parking became much more expensive. And there was a big sort of uproar about lower income families who, for them, it became more of a strain to even visit patients. And that the hospital was not neutral ground anymore. And that felt very odd. There were, they've made all kinds of efforts, and there are ticket vouchers and blah, 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 but that was a big problem at first. It was not equally accessible. Knowing who you feel defensive around, and then asking the other, is there something about me that is threatening right now? I approach conversations with things like bosses or parents very differently, because I already feel at a disadvantage. Shame, we've mentioned already. Shame is incredibly dangerous because we will do anything to protect it and to keep it from seeing the light of day. Most of the people, you guys, like us, who are willing to have conversations like this, are usually a little bit more emotionally developed in terms of at least recognizing that shame exists within all of us. But for some, they will go to the ends of the earth to protect it. So just be very careful about that. Privilege. Privilege is a huge thing. I'm sorry, but cis straight white men are a bit at a disadvantage here because it represents a lot to many other people. I also want to mention, and I'm saying these things not to make anybody feel guilty, but to know that you may have additional hurdles. Or if you are engaging with a cis straight white man, you may have to do more work within yourself to feel comfortable around any of these categories, right? And mentioning emotional privilege, especially people who've not had to deal with extreme hardship, trauma history. I'm having a hard time with, my parents are being rather nonchalant about this quarantine thing. And I'm having a hard time with that because my work is dependent on people staying safe and having emotional safety, and not all of them have emotional safety. And my parents are like, should we go to the beach today? They're in Florida. And I'm having a hard time even just coming to neutral ground with them because what they're talking about and complaining about is like nothing compared to what I'm hearing on a daily basis. And I have to be aware of that when I go into conversations, or else I just end up mad at them all the time. Okay. I'm going to mention using, if you're feeling defensive or agitated in any way, use that as a cue to back up, slow down, take inventory. And I think this is a decent time to mention a few examples. Jeffrey, how are we doing on time?
We are at maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay, Catherine?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to mention a couple of examples and then leave most of them for our discussion on Sunday, because I want to focus on what you guys would find most helpful. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Boundary setting is essential. And boundary setting is not, in layman's terms, it is saying no, but it's not just saying no. No and, or here's why no. It's the one of my favorite definitions is the distance at which I can love you and me at the same time. And so if someone is coming at you aggressively, you can say, I really want to have this conversation, but I am not going to let myself be called names. And you can say why. You can say, I'm feeling defensive right now. And when I get defensive, I'm going to start, there's no way for me to be productive. So this won't work with all people all the time, like maybe not my parents, but it's effective with those who really care about engaging. If you say something like, I'm beginning to feel agitated, may I have a minute? Why are you feeling agitated? That's not helping me feel unagitated. Like, you can keep screaming, but I'm warning you right now that I will not be productive. And I will actually probably want to leave the conversation. You can say, can we pause for a moment? You just said a ton of things and I want to make sure I get it all. That's a great one. If someone's like, and you did this and you did this and you did this, not only do you stop the rant, but you sort of phrase it as, I want to make sure I hear it all. You've said a lot of things, and I feel like I can only address one at a time. These are perfectly acceptable things to say. Oh, here's a good one. If someone's like, well, this and this and this, and I have to believe in this, is it safe to say that believing X might be true is just too big right now? Because that might be true for a lot of people, whether it's climate change or, something else. For some, it's believing that their political party is wrong. That might just be too overwhelming, not just during quarantine. But if you've put a lifetime of stock in believing that X, Y, and Z is right, you may not be able to undermine that in just one conversation. So, if someone is making a ridiculous request, I did a version of this with a clergy group last fall. And one of the examples we used was a parishioner requesting a ridiculous colored carpet in the kitchen or something. And one of the things that I asked was, why the blue carpet? Tell me more. What's the blue carpet about? Or if you're like, this must be true, tell me more about that. Why must it be true? I'm curious. Because understanding that whatever they're saying is true for them. If it must be true, tell me more about it. Help me understand that. Not so far as to say, I'm an idiot, I don't understand it, but tell me more. Help me understand. Boundaries are very important. I'm resisting launching into anything else because I am mindful of time and I know that we have more time to talk. Would this be a good place to at least hit pause?
I think so.
Okay.
We want to make it sort of a good length for that people will view this. And yes, and so I want to thank you, Catherine, for everything you put into this today, all that preparation work that people don't always see, but we can see it in the thoughtfulness of your presentation. And there's so much there that is useful in our everyday lives. I think it'll be worth people taking a look at it, maybe even more than once. And it is very pertinent to our overall topic, which is how do you deal with somebody who has a different view of environmental issues than your own. I also want to...
One more sentence that I'll add in there that I actually do use on a pretty regular basis is, hold on, I'm thinking of the right words to use. Or I'm having a reaction and I'm trying to figure out what the words are. And naming that there's something I want to respond to and say, but I want to find the right words. Or the word I'm thinking of is not what I mean. I say that to clients on a regular basis where I'm saying, like, you just told me a lot and I want to respond. Let me find the words. Someone, on the street might kind of make fun of you, but then when you say what you really mean in a thoughtful way, they're like, that's awesome. So use that.
That's a really good, very practical suggestion. It also shows that you're being vulnerable in that moment. You're showing your imperfection and your willingness to think and actually institute some space, which is needed. I love that. Yeah, this is very practical, very helpful. I want to thank Samara Care Counseling, a very close partner of Winnetka Congregational Church. This idea first started 2 or 3 years ago when I was having a conversation with your staff colleague, Anita Scott.
Yes.
And she actually spoke to Pastor Jeff and me about a program like this presented by one of your former staff members at Medicare. And I thought, sometime this would be really awesome. And then when the climate change dimension to this conversation came up, I went back to Anita and I said, do you remember that conversation a couple of years ago? Do you still have something like that? And so they identified you as our presenter today. So I want to thank Samara Care and also you, Catherine. Again, Catherine will be with us this coming Sunday for a live conversation. That's April 26th at 8:45 to 9:30. And you'll be receiving more information about that on the Spiritual Enrichment Update email that I'll be sending you. Again, Reverend Catherine Watkins, gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Peace.
I will see all of you guys on Sunday. I'll see what you actually look like and sound like.
Believe me, I won't be wearing this.
You know, I don't know where that came from. So many examples just, you know, when I used to do this, the anger management group, I co-facilitated it with another therapist, and it was pretty safe to use examples between us. And then I realized all the clients thought we hated each other because, you know, I was like, so Megan didn't hold the door for me today. And they were like, why'd you do that? We're like, it's made up. So there's just a no win on that one.
Gives me something to hold over you.
Sure, whatever you want. Make it a red shirt. You had better wear that on Pentecost, by the way. Sorry, that was a you statement.
Thanks, Catherine. See you Sunday.
Bye.
All right, bye.